Let's go ahead now and talk about PROUT. As I said, we're doing a series on the 5 fundamental principles of PROUT. Today we're on number 3. And before I show you the principle, I'll just remind you once again of my YouTube channel, my new YouTube channel called PROUT Rev. And please go ahead and look that up on Facebook or look that up on YouTube. Become a subscriber, become a follower, and now I have this new YouTube channel just devoted to PROUT. But here at the Online Meditation, we're covering a little bit of PROUT. We're doing the fundamental principles. So today we are at number 3, as I said. And this is what the principle is. There should be maximum utilization of all physical, metaphysical, and spiritual potentialities of unit and collective bodies of the human society. So, as you know, we live in a capitalist society. The capitalist society, by far, values the individual oftentimes over the collective. Hence why in our society we have people that have billions and billions of dollars. Actually, just a handful of families, while over half of the nation basically shares half of the wealth. And all of the new income that comes into the economy or into a business, it just goes toward the individual at the top, while the workers at the bottom make the same wages for years, and their wealth actually doesn't increase. So that's one extreme. We have the capitalist version of valuing individualism and only individuals. Then we have other socioeconomic systems like communism, where the collective is valued. But unfortunately, in those societies, life becomes a little dry because the individual is sacrificed for the collective. Only the collective is thought about. And there isn't much room for the individual to grow and aspire to new things that aren't already programmed for everybody. In other words, they have to fit into what is programmed for everybody. So neither of these two extremes is good. And, communism was a reaction to capitalism. So communism, socialism sought to correct the problems with capitalism. And PROUT is a reaction to socialism, communism, and capitalism. So it seeks to correct the defects of both of those. Now, these are some of the main two, is that you can't just have a society where the individual is valued, and you can't just have a society where only the collective is valued and not the individual. Neither of these is going to be sustainable. So we have to recognize both and try to balance individual needs with collective needs. So that's why in PROUT, when somebody exerts themselves and does a lot of good work, they can end up, making more money than the rest. But the society makes sure that the rest has all of their minimum requirements and the maximum amenities guaranteed to them, so that you don't have the mistake in capitalism where people become, dirt poor. So we take care of the collective needs according to this principle and in PROUT, but we also allow the individuals to flourish. Now, what that means is that each individual is a resource within themselves. So each person has so much potential. They have physical potential, they have mental potential, spiritual potential. And we live in a society where people do not ever reach their full potential because people are worried about survival. And I just think of family members of mine who work so hard just to live. But yet, I know those family members and they're musicians, they're artists. But do you think they have time to develop their music or develop their painting? Or they have an interest in spirituality or an interest in science, an interest in history? Do you think that they have time to pursue those interests? Do they have time now to take some classes to boost their skills in something that interests them? No. So their potential, I'm heartbroken to say, is squandered, and so many of us never live up to our full potential. Think of all the people that are really, really, really capable of transmitting spirituality to others, like monks and nuns. You know, they have a gift for that. But can they survive in this world? Can they just live off of that? No. Does the society guarantee them some food, a place to live? If the society did, then they could teach this wonderful, wonderful spiritual knowledge and not be burdened by, the needs for survival. And we can guarantee these things because they are abundant. If you've been watching the news, I've been seeing some friends of mine post on Facebook. I haven't fact checked it, but apparently many, many potatoes in this country are going to waste because the farmers cannot afford to ship them, transport them across the country and just give them freely. Because many restaurants are closed, so they've bought less potatoes, so now there's a surplus of potatoes, but those potatoes are just rotting because there's no way to transport them, to spread them around to people who need them. So it's a shame. It's a shame that even though we can guarantee the basic necessities of life to all, that right now in Washington, D.C., near where I live, that there are hundreds, probably maybe even thousands of empty apartments. And yet we have homeless people on the streets. Because the wealth of our planet, the resources available to us, are not rationally distributed. And so we talked about then how the individual gets sacrificed. But what about the collective groups that also get sacrificed? For example, you may have seen on the news this young 25-year-old black man who was killed by 2 or 3 white men, the third white man, an accomplice. He was murdered in cold blood. And that was in February, and they just now arrested these 2 men because there was so much collective pressure. So much pressure that finally they arrested them. But meanwhile, they killed this young black man, bringing so much suffering to his family and to all of us that have to witness time and time again that black lives don't seem to matter in this country. That black people can be killed by the police or by white people with impunity. and even by other non-black folks. And it doesn't matter. And this is something that we need to correct, because we have groups like that in the society that suffer tremendously, needlessly. And we need to have a reformation of the criminal justice system, so that it's not the case anymore that 1 in 3 black men end up in prison, for example. And also, speaking of the larger African American community, that the African American community don't suffer from high incidences of child mortality and poverty and lack of education and malnutrition and so many things like that. In fact, even during this pandemic, it was the African American community and the Latino community and the Native American community, the Latinx community, who actually disproportionately have high numbers of coronavirus cases. Like in New York City, which is the place with the highest cases of coronavirus, but actually the highest place within New York City is Queens, which is where all the immigrants live, the people of color. So we have groups that suffer in our society, the minority groups. They have to be protected. We have to learn to balance, to help the individual and also to help the collective, and then also help the different minority groups, the collective bodies that suffer. Think of women in our society, how they are still subjugated by income through sexual assault. They are, in this country, there isn't a guaranteed law that says that they have to be paid equally with men. They are still largely objectified in so many ways, disrespected. During this quarantine, you had the increase of domestic violence, abuse. And who suffers from that? Women. And so we need to do something also to protect and make sure that women's issues and women's causes are prioritized and they are brought to justice. They are empowered. Some of our best leaders right now in this country are women. And that also one day we see a female president. And with any leader, it has to be somebody who is qualified, who cares about the people. So, these are a few groups to mention. And there's many more collective groups that suffer. So many. The Native American groups, the indigenous populations all over the world, whose languages nobody cares about. Their cultures, their traditions are still threatened, still looked down upon. And so this fundamental principle of PROUT talks about the importance of valuing the individual and also valuing the collective and the collective groups. Letting all have, balancing all. Can't we do that as a society? Can't we figure out how to adjust, rationally distribute the resources so that all can have equity? So I will now, and I invite you to watch my next PROUT Rev videos where I'll be talking more about this fundamental principle and the other ones as well.